of all, I want to say thanks to the people and team from Jobber for putting together another extraordinary event. I have seen the agenda and it is really good. So please take advantage of the great speakers and content that will be provided. This is the second time I have the honor of participating. Today we're going to talk about cash flow management. It is not going to be a lecture but it will be a conversation that includes brief definitions. We'll touch a little bit on the actual calculation, but most of the time we will be talking about tips, ideas, and suggestions based on my own experience. My name is Jorge Ortega, and I have the opportunity to be here today sharing those insights, wearing a couple of hats. The first one, I'm part of the global social team at Visa, and I'm responsible for micro and small business programs that we execute globally. Those programs include financial inclusion, financial management, business and digital management skills, as well as solutions that allow small business owners to participate in the digital economy. And my other hat, it is as a small business owner. 6 years ago, with my wife, we opened an after-school program called Zaniac. It is for children between the ages of 8 to 14, and all programs are technology-based. So it is a lot of math, science, 3D printing with each coding, app development, and other math-related programs. In a nutshell, my work today is to provide small business owners with access to tools, solutions, and services, as well as the motivation and information to take advantage for them. So let's move to the next slide, which is a very basic disclaimer from our legal team. It is something that we need to do every time we engage with external audiences, but let's move to number 3. This is a phrase, and you will be seeing that I like to use phrases that about the topic. This one for me tells the whole story. No? We all know that cash is king, but it matters where that cash is coming from or where it is going, right? Not all cash is equal. Last year, I had the opportunity to talk to you about financial planning and share some tools and metrics that I use in my business and others from our Practical Business Skills platform. But one of the topics that we discussed in detail was cash flow. And today we are going to do a double click on that. The idea is to talk about it a little bit more in detail and try to understand the different, I would say, the different topics and things that can create an unbalanced cash flow. If you were here last year as well, you may remember that I made a lot of analogies related to athletes, because the approach for me from a business owner perspective is exactly the same. To manage your business successfully, you must learn the right techniques, develop the right skills, train and apply those skills into your business operation in order to be successful. Today, the idea is to continue that same approach, trying to learn, test, and pivot. I do not plan on giving a lecture. It is not going to be a lesson. It is, again, more an approach from a financial planning perspective rather than a financial accounting perspective. It is more about understanding the what, the how, but most importantly, the why of cash flow management. And the key takeaway will be, at the end of the day, to understand the levers that change or impact cash flow in a positive or negative way. These ideas may not be specific to your business, but I really hope that they are relevant enough for you to start the ideation process and develop your own plan. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the basic definition of cash flow management. What is cash flow management? It is the process of tracking how much money is coming in or going out of your business. And it is imperative that you know this, because it helps you predict what the business is going to be able to do. It also helps you identify how much money your business is going to be needing in the short term in order to meet some commitments, like paying payroll or suppliers, or even small things like utilities. From a financial planning perspective, it is basically accounts receivables or sales and accounts payable or expenses. The key factor here, it is timing. Why? Because times impacts the cash flow balance in several ways, and we will be talking about that during the conversation. And always also take into consideration that you don't collect your sales or the money that you're owed on a regular basis. Timing also affects that. And I will be sharing some examples, I would say, or illustrations from my own business experience. And just to start with one of those, I can tell you that we have been very lucky, because what we did is although we provide educational services, we treat the business as a product. So what we try to do is to collect sales immediately. We based our operations on digital payments. So at the end of the day, every time we do a sale or we can engage with a parent, in less than, I would say, 24 hours, we have the money on our account. But we have to deliver that educational service maybe in 2 or 3 weeks. So that's the impact of cash flow in timing. And that's why forecasting and planning will be very, very relevant in the next couple of slides. Just before we move forward, I want to make sure that we are on the same page. Cash flow measures, I would say, the net amount of cash and cash equivalents coming into your business. And a cash flow statement, it is basically the report that reflects that inflows and outflows on a specific time period. But before we go, let me share into the next slide. Let me share a couple of data points that I believe are really relevant to our conversation today. The first one is there's a US bank study that implies that 82% of businesses that fail mention cash flow as the main reason. Even more important, that is starting with too little money or not having a well-defined plan. So cash flow is that relevant. And the other, I would say, is to a JP Morgan study established, they did this study in 25 metro areas in the US. It established that on average, every small business owner has less than 15 days of cash buffer in their account. So again, cash flow becomes a lifeline, becomes a reality in terms of the sustainability and the resilience of the business. Moving to the next slide, what I want to share here is that when you're talking about cash flow, basically you as a business owner, you become a money manager. And it is critical for you to understand as a business owner how money management works. If you're responsible for the financial health of the business, you need to get comfortable with these topics and comfortable with the idea of having this as a source of information in order to plan and act accordingly. Just remember that doing a cash flow statement is just the start. The analysis and the decision-making process that you need to put into it is where the information translates into data and business initiatives. And again, you need to pivot and change or react with your business as needed. How? Basically, money management is about finding the revenues and the expenses of the company. Pretty basic, right? But the other is, how are you going to be forecasting these inflows and outflows? I am not going to tell you how to forecast, because obviously you know your business, your clients, your ecosystem, and how do you basically interact with competition and customers. But what I need to share with you today is that you need to forecast properly. What do I do in my business? I basically use 3 potential scenarios. I do an optimistic, a realistic, and a pessimistic forecast. And I try to fine tune those forecasts as, I would say, as regular or as recurrently as needed, no? Mostly on a 1-month basis. But let me illustrate an example on how the forecasting works and how you need to do this in order to be able to respond to any potential cash flow challenges. I have a friend, Luis, who has a business, and the other day he was telling me that he made a profit of $20,000. And I thought that it was pretty good, no? But at the end of the month, he only showed in his account $8,000. So what happened to the $12,000? Which is around 60 to 65% of the profit that he said he made. In fact, he didn't have that money because it was in accounts receivable. So again, it's a lot different to talk about profit and to talk about cash management. Forecasting would have allowed Luis to plan for this situation and implement initiatives to help him collect the $12,000 that we're talking about. He is now considering different initiatives or plans to accelerate the collection process in his own company. So the next slide, we're going to be talking about how do we build or create a cash flow statement. Getting a little bit more technical, this slide illustrates a basic equation on cash flow management, and I'll describe it to you. The first one is the cash at the beginning of the period. No, that is the cash that is sitting in our business account. The second are the inflows from operations. So basically, that's your day-to-day business operation and how do you collect revenue or have expenses. The third component is the cash from investments. As you can see, this is I won't say it's going to be very recurring, but we're talking about things like property and equipment. The third one is about the inflows from financing and from dividends. Also, I don't think this is going to be very, very relevant on a daily basis or monthly basis, but there is something that you need to consider. And finally, you have at the end of the month or for a specific period, the cash at the end of that period. This is the basic equation. I just put some examples on how it is impacted on the inflows and outflows. But the goal at the end of the day is to have a balanced cash flow statement. And although sometimes it is not going to be positive because you may be growing very fast or you may have had a big expenditure, at the end of the day, on a recurring basis, you should be looking for a positive outlook in terms of cash balance. Moving to the next slide. I really like this phrase about Michael Dell and his company. As you can read there, it is running out of gas. And what is that? I think it is. We as business owners are always looking at the P&L, right? But the key metric is cash flow, because we may have some, again, as we explained a little bit before, you may have some periods with negative cash flow, but if it is because you're growing the company or you're making investment or because of seasonality, it makes a lot of sense. But if it is rather a recurring, I would say, situation, you may need to change a little bit how you approach that, because cash flow at the end of the day, it's the lifeline of the businesses. Just to illustrate how the inflows and outflows work, let me put a couple of examples on each of these operations. If a company has a positive cash flow, it means that the company has liquid assets on hand to face any potential commitments. It can cover its obligation, they can invest in the business or reinvest on the business, or even return money to the business owner or to the shareholders. It's also that you're running a solid and resilient business. So a positive cash flow, it's always a good, I would say, indicator. We have seen many companies fail because of cash flow management. As I mentioned before, 82% of them, usually of those who fail, it is because of a cash flow problem. But there are very interesting ideas and business models which could have been very successful if they had the opportunity to measure cash flow in another way. Why? Because if you're seeing that your company is growing very fast, but you don't have the cash on hand to invest or reinvest in the company, you may need a working capital line of credit, or you may need investors, or you may need external cash in order to cover that growth opportunity. So at the end of the day, this is what we're talking about. Don't run out of gas, because gas is what you need in order for the business to move forward. Moving to the next slide, what we're going to be talking about is about the cash flow levers. Basically, these are the mechanisms on how you could change the cash flow balance of your company. And by levers, I mean the actions that you can take in order to have that positive cash flow that we have been talking about. As an example, you know that you have used cash if you increase your inventory, right? Or if you extended credit to your customers, or if you acquire new equipment. Those would be ways that you use cash. You can also create cash. Maybe you start to collect receivables faster, or sold some inventory, or even use some inventory or an asset. So those are the levers that change the equation. But being able to know what moves the needle, I would say, on developing cash access, it's also knowing what is part of the profit-making process. No? So 1, you have to increase revenue. 2, you have to lower expenses. And the third one is how to use tools with your process. And let me share, just as an illustration, 3 ways that I've tried to use those levers in my own business operation. As I mentioned, we have an educational service company, and what we tried we implemented 3 things last year in order to increase cash flow. The first one is we started offering discounts for early payments. Obviously, as I mentioned, we try to collect immediately, and that's why we move into digital payments. But also when we have corporate accounts, we try to collect as early as possible. The second is make it easy for you to collect or to be paid, or use information in order to be very efficient in your collection process. Even use Jobber, no, to send reminders and invoice digitally. And the other could be lease or rent excess capacity. No, we used to have a retail location, and obviously it was closed on Sundays, so no one wants a computer lesson on Sundays. But what we started doing is offering technology-based theme parties on Sundays, and that allows us to use excess capacity that was not being used properly. On the other hand, with lower expenses, one of the things is avoid to overspending. I know it sounds really easy, but sometimes because we're so interested in growing the business, we lose visibility on overspending. The other one could be to maybe lease some equipment or that you may not need to buy. In our case, we use a lot of computers, obviously. And what we decided to do is lease the equipment instead of buying it, because that money could be used for other things that are revenue making, like marketing or social media. And the final, try to liquidate inventory that you're not using. No? So again, some ideas, but in summary, it is basically to identify potential levers for your business and set up a plan to be ready to implement it. So that is, at the end of the day, the usefulness of the levers. Moving to the next slide, what I want to show you is how do I apply those levers into my business planning. This is a real-life example of my business. Last year, we talked about creating a scorecard in order to have a snapshot of the business operation. A scorecard for me is a performance measurement and a strategic management system. It is a guide in order for me to see where do I have to put my time, energy, and effort into the business operation. And obviously, what I'm trying to do today is I included one column that it is the potential impact on my cash flow statement. Just really fast, let me share what are the components of this scorecard. The first one is financial metrics. No? Obviously, as any other company, we have financial metrics, and what we establish here are the goals for the calendar year. The second one, it is related to the business outlook and how we operate our business. Just as an example, we identified that we were doing 80% of our sales on just 5 products. So we needed to change that to avoid dependency and risk. So what do? We came up with a new revenue streams to concentrate on cross-selling. Why cross-selling? Because for us, it's really inexpensive to try to sell to current customers rather than trying to acquire new ones. The third one is related to new clients and how do we start developing initiatives and programs for business segments or target segments that we didn't have before. At the end of the day, as you can see there, 10% of our revenue needs to come from segments that we were not serving 2 years ago. And finally, how do we position our business to grow and expand with our talent? But please see the second column to the right, from left to right, which I highlighted to show how each of these initiatives, plans, or strategies affect the cash flow. I know it sounds complicated, but if you're running your day-to-day operation, this is a must to have. For me, having a snapshot on where you are versus your goals, it's very useful. And if you know what of those activities or initiatives are impacting your cash flow management, even better. Moving to the next slide, just to finish on the phrases, it is just to open the topic of seasonality. Seasonality, it is something that impacts every single business, unless you have a membership service or something very, very straight in terms of timing. But at the end of the day, seasonality is going to be one of the key factors for financial planning and cash flow management. The next slide will show you a chart from my business operation. As you can see here, the seasonality, if I want to define it, it is the influx of cash on a specific season and how do you get little to no cash in other parts of the fiscal year. This chart shows monthly revenues and expenses from my business before the pandemic. And as you can see, it is very seasonal. We have 3 very good, I would say, seasons in terms of business cycle. And then our expenses are a little bit more in line with time. And it may sound crazy, but my business is based on the school calendar, and I have to react based on that seasonality. As an example, what we try to implement in order to try to balance this seasonality is collect money, obviously, as I mentioned, ahead of time. The other is try to create new revenue opportunities and try to avoid expenses at some point in time. Let me share 3 of those initiatives that we implemented in my business. The first one is new sources of income. What we, as you know, we offer technology-based programs, but what we try to do is change from the school calendar cycle. So we started to offer corporate events and parties, as I mentioned before, and try to balance it out a little bit with the summer programs, which is really, really the peak. The second is we started negotiating with vendors. Or we operate in a business or in a retail location. So what we did is talk to our property management company, and we negotiated that we could pay the rent based on our sales cycle, and we were able to do so. And the final one was to use or have a working capital line of credit open all the time, just in case it is needed. Sometimes we've had to use it, but we make it a priority to obviously pay it back as soon as possible. The next one, the next slide is just to start the conversation on why cash flow is relevant. Cash flow management is really relevant because we already discussed most of the things that affect your business if you don't have a very healthy cash flow management. Hopefully, after what we have been discussing today, you can share with me how critical and relevant this kind of information and data is going to be for you. The question when we grow our business is not whether we will use cash. We will. It's a given. It is how we are going to finance that growth. So sometimes we'll use excess cash flow, but sometimes we'll need external cash inflows in order to fund that growth. Understanding where your cash flow is and where it's coming from and going to, it is going to be part of us running a successful company. So at the end of the day, don't run out of cash without knowing why. The other topic in the next slide is the key question: is it more important than profit? It depends, no? When you're a business owner, you wear several hats, right? You may be the new business development, you may be the human resources, you may be finance and accounting, but your business time and investments are what you have today as a business. If you have a point in time where you need an investor, having a cash flow positive balance is going to be a key factor. At the end of the day, cash flow is one of the first things that potential investors or buyers will look at with sales growth and profit margins. Or even if you plan to fund your business with a loan or a capital line of credit, financial institutions will also look at this. So profit is really important because obviously it means that you're making money, but cash flow means that the company has the cash on hand in order to fund future growth. So obviously that's part of the conversation. Is it more important? It really doesn't matter, no? As I mentioned in the case with my friend Luis, he thought he had a 20,000 profit in that operation. And at the end of the day, we know that unless he collects that money, it is still not cash on hand. And the final question it is, how do you get comfortable managing cash flow? And it is going to be on the next slide. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, you need the attitude, the discipline, the persistence in order to be proficient on cash flow management. Today, we touch on several things from the definition, the calculation, and the levers that impact and how can you apply that into your business operation. We mentioned that you should do the cash flow planning once per month and develop potential scenarios in terms of forecasting. And we discussed how cash flow levers, or the ones that I use in my business, can help you change the financial outlook of your company. We also mentioned how tools like Jobber can facilitate the cash management process. It will save you money and time. And again, Jobber and Visa are here to help you with your small business skills and allow you to have the time to allocate time into what really makes click in terms of your business operation. At the end, also, we believe that educating yourself, it's going to be a part of that cash flow management process. I can tell you that I do read articles, listen to podcasts, watch videos on cash flow management. And more on cash flow management is about the ideas, the concepts, the tips that can affect cash flow management. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you will need to be creative. And I know like time is limited, but make it a priority to continue your conversation. And finally, I just want to thank you for the time. I want to congratulate you for being a small business owner. You may be evaluating a business idea today, or you may have been in operation for several years, but at the end of the day, it is about having the right tools, having the right information, and being able to manage the business properly. You know that there are multiple ways to make your life easier as a small business owner. And again, you have a partner with Jobber. You also have a partner with Visa. Take a look at all the solutions that we both offer that can help you take your business to the next level. Again, my name is Jorge Ortega. It was a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much, and good luck with your business.